Are you lost in the chaotic whirlwind of day-to-day busyness? Do you yearn for a deeper sense of meaning and purpose in your life? Welcome to Be You, Your Story, Your Purpose, the podcast dedicated to empowering women on their journey of self-discovery and finding their true purpose through their own story. I'm your host, Brenda Simmons. Welcome, my friends, to the podcast. I'm so grateful that you are joining me today. I want to start out today by sharing 3 different stories. The first one actually was a reoccurring story. My son, he loves Reese's peanut butter cups. I think he still does to this day. But when he was little, he just absolutely loved them. And his favorite time to get them was at Halloween. And in fact, he knew that it was wrapped up in an orange wrapper. He didn't necessarily know what they were called because he was really, really little. And so at Halloween, when he would go trick-or-treating, he would go to the door and he'd say his whole thing, trick or treat. And then he would say, "Do you have any orange ones?" That was his approach every single time. "Do you have any orange ones?" And people were so enamored with him that they would look for the Reese's peanut butter cups and they would give it to him if he, because he had asked for it. And so then he would come home and he would look at what everybody else had and he would do then the bargaining and the bartering would happen. And so he would get so many more Reese's peanut butter cups because he, again, asked for it. So that happened every single year, I think, that he went trick-or-treating. We were always in anticipation, wondering how many Reese's peanut butter cups that he would come home with. So my next story happened just really recently. I've got a Facebook friend who is in a lot of financial distress because they are trying to help their son who has some severe addictions to drugs and has made some really poor choices, and it has made it so that they have become responsible for all of his financial problems, and to the point where they're at the brink of losing everything. And my heart just goes out to them. And she's been really cryptic about it for a long time, but then one day she posted, "We just don't know where else to turn. We have tried everything that we can. We've looked at every single avenue and we don't know what else to do. And so we are asking if any of you can help us out financially, then please do help." And people are donating, people are helping out. And it's just such a wonderful thing to witness just because they asked for it. Now, my last story happened when I was a little girl. I was maybe 10 years old or something like that. And I had a friend who was moving away from the area and she was having a going away party. But the thing was, I was grounded at the time. And so I just assumed that my parents would say, "No way, you can't go because you're grounded." And I don't even remember what I was grounded for. But I do remember just feeling absolutely devastated that I couldn't go to this party. Well, I ended up in tears in my mom's arms. She's giving me a hug and she says, "Well, why didn't you just ask?" And I told her, "Well, I thought you would say no." And she said, "I actually would have said yes because this is a special circumstance." And unfortunately for me, by the time we had this conversation, the party was pretty much done. And so I totally missed out because I did not ask. So obviously what these stories have in common is that they deal with asking. And I think asking is super, super powerful. And it's something that we need to address on occasion. We need to see, are we using this power sufficiently? And are we taking advantage of the opportunities that come our way when we simply ask? Now, there are 3 different kinds of asking. So there's a query, right? So this is just gathering information. There is an invitation, which has kind of a lighter energy. You're asking somebody to go somewhere or do something with you. And then there's a request, which it's a little bit more demanding. Demanding is maybe not quite the right word, but it's definitely something that you are asking something to do for you. It has a little bit more heavier energy to it. So why don't we ask? And I want you to keep these 3 different kinds of asking in the back of your mind, because we're going to address all of these as we talk about them. So, why is it that we don't make the ask? Well, I think there's several reasons. Number one, there's a lot of fear there. There's fear of what people will think of you. There's fear that you may look incompetent. There's fear of the actual answer itself. Maybe there's fear of the consequences that will happen because of the ask. So I was helping out a student of real estate, and I was kind of asking her how things are going with school and whatnot, and she was started asking me all these questions about her parents who live in New York. And so it's not a state that I live in and not a state that I'm familiar with. And so their laws and their rules are a little bit different than where I'm at. And I finally just asked her, why, what your parents need to do is talk to a realtor out there. And she says, oh, no, 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 they don't want to pay any realtor fees. And I was like, but you can ask. You can just get information, right? It's that query. You can just get the knowledge that you need. And she says, no, 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 they don't want to pay for anything. And they're afraid if they ask any realtor at all, that they're going to have to be committed and they're going to have to pay all these realtor fees, which was not true, right? You can ask and get information. So, but their fear of this supposed fee that they were going to incur just by asking a question really paralyzed them. And it made it so that they were unable to move forward with the best solution because they didn't have the information that they needed. And unfortunately, their daughter, who was only in school, didn't know enough to really give them the advice that they needed. So, one of the best ways that we can combat the fear of asking is to think of all of the things that can go wrong and just come up with the very, very worst thing that you can think of. Then you're going to figure out how you would handle that situation. And this often helps us to stop catastrophizing, and it helps us to lower our anxiety levels because you know then how you're going to handle that situation because you've already worked that out mentally. The really key thing about this, though, is that often when you learn what the worst thing is, you realize it's really not that big of a deal. Often it's just a no. And it's really easy to deal with a no because then you just move on. But the key is that then you've got that information that you need, and then you understand, and you've got that plan of moving forward with whatever it is that you're dealing with. So fear is a big one, why we don't make an ask. Another one is we assume we know the answer already. So this is what happened to me when I was a little girl. I assumed my parents would say no. And I was so distraught about this. And unfortunately, I was wrong. And I assumed where I should not have assumed. Now, here's something else that happened to me. I was doing a role play with my trainer. And as we were going through this role play, her expression changed. And I was supposed to get to an ask, right? But because of this change in her expression, I totally backed off. And I was like, oh, I did something wrong here. And so I shouldn't make the ask because it's not going to go my way. And so again, I assumed that what the outcome would be, when in fact that was not the case at all. And she even asked me, well, why did you totally change tactics on that? And I said, well, your expression on your face made it seem like it wasn't going, like you weren't even going to accept my ask and go with it. And she said, well, you assumed then. And I said, yeah, I did. She says, that's not where I was going. And so again, once again, I assumed something that was not true. And so we have to be really, really careful to not do this because oftentimes we are wrong and you just don't know what that answer is going to be because you don't have the background for that person. You don't have the thought pattern of that person. You just don't know. And so sometimes it's good to just put that assumption away and do the ask because it will provide opportunities for you often where you didn't have them before. All right, the last one that I want to talk about is to things that prevent us from doing the ask is we think that we can figure things out on our own. It's the classic, I'm not going to stop and ask for directions because I can do it. I can read the map. Well, now we've got Google Maps. It's a lot easier. So you don't necessarily have to ask for directions. But the principle still applies. Sometimes we don't make the ask because we're prideful or we, think that we can do it ourselves. And this is so interesting to me because my husband, he does handyman work. And so he often fixes issues where the homeowner thought they knew how to do it and they could figure that out on their own rather than asking for somebody who knows how to do it to come in and do it right the first time. And so you have to watch yourself. If you lack the knowledge and the perspective that you need to make an intelligent and the best next move, then perhaps you need to ask somebody else to either help you, to guide you, to do it for you if that's what the case needs. Ultimately, when we think that we can figure things out on our own and we don't have all the information, it really is a waste of time and a waste of energy because it takes us longer to figure it out and it takes a lot of effort and we make a lot more mistakes. And so then you have to go back and fix those mistakes. So if you just lean into that ask and get the information that you need or the help that you need, then you can move along a lot quicker and with a lot less effort. All right. So what do we get from asking? Well, I mean, this seems really obvious, right? So sometimes it's the very thing that we need. But what's interesting is sometimes we get, what we need isn't necessarily what we're asking for. We might get the help and the understanding, but it may not be congruent with what we are assuming it will be, which is again why it's so good to ask. Another thing that benefits us from asking is you get to learn who your community is. So what I mean by this is you can really pay attention to how people respond to you when you are asking questions. Are they respectful or are they belittling? Are they genuine? Do they show genuine interest or do they show apathy? Are they truly helpful or are they just trying to move you along, right? And so you can get an idea of who are the people who have your best interest at heart, the people who truly have an interest in where you're going and want to give you the help that you need. And this could be, for anything like getting directions or even like a relationship, right? How are people reacting when you ask them questions? Are they vested in your forward momentum? Another thing that we can get from asking is confidence. Confidence is only gained through competency, which means that you have to do things often in order to gain that competency. And so the more questions that you ask, the more people you ask for help, the more people you try to get information from, the more people who you invite to do something, it gets a lot easier the more often you do that. I was actually talking with a friend today who was in a fundraising situation and she said, I hate asking for money. It's just, she runs this nonprofit and she said, it's not a place where I'm comfortable, but I also understand that it's the space that I'm in. And so I said, well, how did you get comfortable with it? And she says, just by doing it over and over and over again. And now I don't have a problem doing it at all. So that confidence comes through repetition. And so the more you ask, the more confident you will be in making that ask. So something else that we get from asking is it's a really good measurement of our compatibility in a relationship. And this can be any kind of relationship. It can be a friendship. It can be a work relationship. It can be a romantic relationship. And I mean, it really is anything. So it kind of leans into that number 2 where you're learning who your community is, but this we're taking it a little bit deeper. So there really needs to be a lot of give and take in the asking and the answering. So if you're carrying the whole conversation, or you're doing all of the asking and there's not an equal balance of that, there's a compatibility issue there. So I did a one-to-one. I really like to do one-to-ones to helps me to get to know people and help me to understand if we're a good match to move forward either on a collaboration or on a in a client relationship or whatever. And so I was doing this one-to-one with this guy, and he talked the entire time. The entire time. Like, I only had an hour with this guy, and I told him up front, I only have an hour. And it was a Zoom call. And it was like word vomiting, by the end, and I would keep asking him questions, but not once until like we had a minute left that did he ask me a question. And in that moment, as I'm going through this conversation, I'm realizing he is not a good match for me because he is unwilling to be equal in our conversation. He's going to dominate the conversation. And so he's going to fight for what he wants rather than looking at my interests as well and really seeing how we can mesh together. And so that was a really good example for me on how just by asking questions and seeing how people respond, it helps us to know if we are compatible in a relationship. Now, there is power in asking. Asking sets in motion your next steps. A lot of times I'll have all these things that I need to accomplish, but sometimes they depend on other people. And so I'll shoot them a text and I'll ask a question, and I know, okay, that's going to get me to my next step because I've made that ask. Asking also gives us control. I don't know if you've ever heard this phrase, but the person who asks the most questions controls the conversation. The person who asks the questions is going to control the direction of where you're going, not necessarily just in a conversation, but perhaps it's in a bigger setting of, if you've got a business. If you're asking those questions, then you'll get a better idea of where you need to go, what your next steps are. So you get a lot of control by asking questions. You also get knowledge and problem resolution. A couple years ago, I was dealing with a herniated disc, super, super painful. I had major sciatic nerve pain. My foot went numb. It was really, really distressing for me and a very, very difficult time. So I asked experts in a variety of different fields to give me their opinion. I went to several different doctors, therapists, and massage therapists, the whole thing. I did everything that I could think of to heal from this herniated disc. And the beautiful thing was that it worked. I was able to find the solutions that I needed to help me to heal. And often it wasn't, all solutions from one person. It was, I got a nugget here, a nugget there, a nugget here, a nugget there. And by compiling all of that, then I was able to come up with something very individualized for me that worked. And where my doctor said, you're for sure heading for surgery, I avoided that. And I don't have any problems with it anymore. So knowledge can lead to your problem resolution, but don't expect it to come from one place. You've got to keep asking. So we've addressed asking other people. What about asking yourself? How does asking yourself benefit you? I want to go back to those different types of asking: the query, the invite, and the request. And let's go through each of these and see how they relate to asking ourselves questions. So query, remember, was gathering information. It is very enlightening to ask yourself questions. Sometimes we'll react in a certain way, and maybe it surprises us, or we don't understand why we react in a certain way. And we have to remember that our subconscious runs 90% of our lives. And it knows why you act the way you do, why you react the way you do, even though you may not consciously understand that. So when we ask ourselves these questions, we're asking our brains to give us the answers that it already knows. And sometimes you'll get answers in dreams, sometimes in memories, sometimes a thought will pop into your head. But if you don't ask yourself for that information, it's not going to give it to you because your brain loves to answer questions. And so when you give it that question, it's going to give you the answer. Again, it may not be the answer that you're looking for or that you thought you would get, but you will get an answer. So let's look at the second one, to invite, to go somewhere or do something. Again, this has a lighter energy. This is asking your brain to dream, to be creative, to discover possibilities and opportunities. And when we do this, we are expanding and developing our skills, our relationships, and we are solidifying our identity. So this is so valuable to ask yourselves, where is it you want to go? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What do you want to do? What's on your bucket list? What's something that you want to do with your family? What's something that you want to do by yourself? Invite yourself to dream and to come up with things that you would really love to be and love to do. So this is super, super powerful. All right. So number 3 is to request to do something for you. It's a little bit more demanding. This part is when you're engaging your brain to make your dream a reality, to plan, to make your goals, and to work towards achieving them. So once again, you're saying, okay, I want to do this today. I'm going to do it, and then you follow through with it. And so when we ask ourselves to the inquiry, the invite, and the request, we are going to understand ourselves a little bit better. We're going to be able to create an identity that we can really love and really shoot for or progress towards. And then that progression is that request. And isn't that so wonderful how this all works together? Now, inherent in all of these asks, whether you're asking somebody else or whether you're asking yourself, is potential risk. Remember, we talked about that when we talked about fear, right? Sometimes we're scared of what that answer is going to be, right? There is risk in asking. That's why it's a struggle to do it sometimes, because that you risk uncovering unpleasant experiences, especially if you're doing it, asking yourself that, these experiences that may have been suppressed that you need to work through. You can risk exposing mindsets that aren't serving you or experiencing a block yet again. You risk not achieving your goal or your vision. And here's the thing. I had a friend who would say all the time, life is too risky not to take risks. There are risks inherent in everything. And so you've got to choose what are the ones that you're going to accept in order to achieve the life that you want to have. And that is going to include asking, making those asks to yourself and to others to move you in a place of forward momentum. I love this quote by Charles P. Steinmetz. He said, "No man really becomes a fool until he stops asking questions." Asking questions leads to knowledge, but it also leads to wisdom, how we use that knowledge. And it is a part of our own maturity and our own forward movement. So be wise, my friends. Take the risk, ask the questions, ask as many questions as you want, because you will get answers. And with that, I hope that you have a wonderful week and that you know that your purpose is in your story. Until next time, take care.
Celebrate your dreams, let them take flight, for you are a star, shining bright in every step you take. Let your